Hello guys, so we are now at Korea Blockchain Week and here with you Anna Tutova, co-founder of Coins-Telegram, and our guest Alex Pruden, who is co-founder and CEO of Aleo. Aleo is layer 1 zero knowledge blockchain, and it's already a unicorn. They're valued at $1.45 billion, and they got investors like A16Z, SoftBank, and many others. Great to have you here, Alex.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and you have such an interesting story. You told that you were in the US Army and then later you got into crypto, and I think you were as well venture capital partner at A16Z. So can you tell us about your journey and how did it come that from US Army you got into tech space?
As you said, I started my career in the U.S. Army. I joined the Army after 9/11 in the U.S., and I went to a military academy and then graduated in 2008. I did 3 tours of duty in the Middle East, and the last tour was actually in Turkey, where my Special Forces unit was assigned to train Syrian rebels that were fighting against the Assad regime. And many of the people that we were interacting with, were themselves refugees from the conflict, and I was introduced to Bitcoin not by the Syrians but by some folks from Turkey, but in the context of the Syrian refugee crisis and the idea of Bitcoin being, at the time was this novel idea to me where you could, memorize a seed phrase or a private key and put that in knowledge in your head, and you could go across any border in the world and still have your life savings. Because many of the people that we worked with, in addition to the human tragedy, it was also a financial tragedy. Like they had to leave behind their real property or things that, unfortunately was their life savings in many ways. And so Bitcoin being a solution to that was what inspired me to get into this space. So
Which year was it?
This was in 2015. 2015 was when I was in Turkey working with the Syrians, and I came back from that deployment and decided to leave the military. I wanted to get into cryptocurrency full time. Had no idea where to start. I did not have a technical background at all. Never took a computer science class.
Did you hear about zero knowledge proofs before? Or?
Nope. I went to Stanford. I was fortunate to get into Stanford Business School, but I
was it after your military?
After my military career. Yep. So I went to Stanford, and then I wanted to learn how blockchain worked technically, and so I took my first computer science class that I took was Introduction to Cryptography, this master's level class, which I got a very bad grade in, but thankfully there's no grade disclosure at Stanford, so no one will ever know how bad. But that was the course that I was introduced to zero knowledge cryptography, and it really inspired in me a love and interest in the field of cryptography beyond just cryptocurrency and blockchain. But it was also very important for teaching me how technically all of these cryptocurrencies are constructed and the technologies that underpin them. So anyway, actually my professor from that course was an advisor to A16Z, and I guess I should also mention I worked briefly at Coinbase on the corp dev team, and then also at another venture firm called GGV Capital, and was planning on going back to Coinbase actually, but this cryptography professor introduced me to the folks at A16Z because he was an advisor, and long story short, I hit it off with the team and ended up joining as one of the first members of A16Z Crypto, where I spent about 2 years after my graduation from Stanford. And then I enjoyed venture capital quite a bit. I learned a lot from the team, and I've worked directly with people like Chris Dixon and Ben Horowitz, and and Ali Yahya and Katie Hahn, and so it was great to get to know and learn from those people. But I really wanted to be a startup and be a builder, not just a funder of builders. And I came back to the idea of zero knowledge cryptography, thought that it was really revolutionary, and ended up joining this company called Aleo. So I was the first employee. Howard Wu was the main founder. There were 4 founders total, but he was the main founder, and I had worked with him through some other stuff that I had done at A16Z and gotten to know him. And he was building this new zero knowledge focused protocol based on this research paper that I had read at Stanford, and I was like, wow, this is a really cool idea, and I just felt very passionate about joining it, and so I left A16Z and joined Aleo, and here I am.
So how is it different for you from investing into other startups to running your own?
It couldn't be more different. Investing, they're both cool in their own ways, but I would say investing, you're forced to really take a very broad view of the world. You know, you have to be able to keep a very wide perspective. You know, in order to make sure you're catching the latest trends or understanding, you know, the way the space is developing. Whereas at a startup, you know, you're forced to have a very deep view of one thing, right? You need to become an expert in just that thing. So that's one difference. I think the other big difference is my experience in venture capital is it's you know, A16Z is obviously a big team of people that works together, but I would say the day-to-day experience, specifically as an investor, is more of an individual sport. I guess like tennis, for example, compared to, you know, being at a startup is like being on a football team or soccer, soccer team, right? Where it's like you need to work together as a group, which I really found appealing, especially given my military background. I mean, I enjoyed that aspect of the military, being part of a team, being able to lead people, and so. And then the last thing I would say is, you know, in a VC, if you think of it as, I guess if you think of these as bets, right? You know, in VC you can kind of you can spread a lot of bets around the table, and if any one of them doesn't work out, you kind of it's the name of the game. Whereas at a startup, you're putting all your chips in the one bet, and I think that creates emotionally higher highs and lower lows. But overall, it's been a great experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I personally much prefer being a builder as opposed to being an investor.
And does your military background help you in running the company?
I think it does. I mean, maybe it helps. You should really ask my employees. They might not like that, honestly, but no, I think
like military discipline.
Yeah, maybe they're like, I wish you had a little less military, but no, I think the way that I would say that it helps is, you know, I was in, you know, I've been in combat numerous times and very stressful situations, and I think it's helpful to have that perspective at a startup where it can be very stressful at times. You know, people can be frustrated with each other, but you know, it's not life and death, right? You know, even though this is technology that I do think is serious and has a huge potential, I think it's helpful to have the perspective and be able to kind of stay calm when things are a little bit crazy. And I think the other thing is, you know, one thing that I really took away from my military experience is just the importance of being a respectful leader to every single person on the team. So even like the lowest ranking person is someone who, you know, might become the most important person in one specific moment, right? And treating everyone with respect is something that I learned from leaders I work with in the military, and it's something that I try and carry into my management of Aleo. So.
And for people who are not yet familiar with zero knowledge proofs, can you tell more in simple words and explain what it is?
Yeah, so zero knowledge cryptography, or zero knowledge proofs, also sometimes known as ZK, is this cryptographic technique where you can prove a fact without revealing why that fact is true. So you can prove something is true without revealing why. And a simple example that I like to give a lot of times for this is, you know, the game is a simple gambling game of poker. And so poker is a game where you get 5 cards, and your hand is scored based on, you know, some combination of cards. So for example, 3 of a kind, you know, is a fairly good hand. And you know, the way when you're playing a poker game, at the end of the poker game, when when it's time to find out who won, the way to determine who won is to show your cards, and that's the only way the other player can verify it. Now, what zero knowledge cryptography does is enabling you to prove that you have 3 of a kind or 2 pair or something without showing your cards, right? It's weird to say it in those terms, but I like saying it in those terms because it demonstrates how there's no physical analog for this, right? This is really math at a very deep level, but this concept of being able to prove without revealing why has no physical analog, and so that is kind of that's zero knowledge cryptography in a nutshell.
So now we have as well a lot of projects which are layer 2s, roll-ups to Ethereum using ZK. So why did you decide to build layer 1?
I really love this question because you said there's a lot of layer 1, layer 2 projects using ZK. And actually, I would argue, strictly speaking, they're not using ZK. So ZK is zero knowledge, and I think what people do use are snarks, right? So oftentimes, snarks, and this is like for a little bit of technical definitions, SNARK stands for succinct, non-interactive argument of knowledge. And sometimes they're called ZK snarks, where you have zero knowledge up front of that. But the important letter in there from the roll-up perspective is succinct, right? So a roll-up is there to batch transactions and then create a proof of this many transactions and put that proof on chain that can be verified easily or cheaply. but there's actually no privacy in that. And I think the definition of ZK and the ZK rollup is zero knowledge. It's that example of like I can prove to you the cards without showing them to you. So actually, I think ZK rollups is a bit of a misnomer, quite frankly, because the ZK property is not actually used in that setting, right? And this is one of the reasons why we built a layer one. And maybe you should ask, why is it not used? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One is just the nature of how rollups are constructed. The other is that it's quite difficult to achieve zero knowledge or privacy on Ethereum based on the way it's constructed with the account model, with the cryptographic curves that are used, etc. And so we built Aleo as a new layer one in order to build kind of from the ground up with this idea of zero knowledge in mind, that you and I can interact in some form, whether I'm sending you money, whether I'm proving to you some aspect of my identity, whether we're playing a game, and all those interactions can happen where I can prove it but don't have to show you, right? And I think that enables a completely new paradigm for Web3.
And you use as well your own language, Leo, so can you tell more about this and why is a separate language needed?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Leo is our domain-specific language for Aleo, and the reason we created a new language is because of really our blockchain, which is I guess I'll say in simple terms, so Aleo is a smart contract blockchain. It has a VM, right? It's very different than the EVM, but it has a VM. And to interact with that VM, like you do with any VM, there need to be, it needs to be given instructions, right? And in the EVM, for example, with a computer, like these instructions are kind of interpreted in bits and bytes, right? Because that's how computers operate. In the world of zero knowledge, though, it's a little bit more complicated than that. The instructions have to be defined over these things called cryptographic curves. They're group elements, for example, and you're doing operations like pairings. And so there's a lot more complicated cryptography that goes on under the hood. And so what Leo does is take all that complicated cryptography and abstract it away from the developer, so that your experience as a developer is writing something that looks like JavaScript, and you don't have to worry about doing all of the job of the compiler. And that's really what what makes Leo special. The language of course, what you see as a developer, but what makes it special is the compiler that takes away all of the complexity of writing a zero knowledge proof or a circuit, from the end developer.
So is this language quite similar to JavaScript? Or,
Yeah, we usually describe it as like sort of JavaScript and Rust. It's got some elements of both, but it's what you would call, I guess, like, as far as language, programming language people would define as a high level language. So it's pretty human readable.
So mostly is this developers coming and building and using your language newcomers to development, or are they already have some background and experience?
I think it's a mix. I mean, there's some people that have picked up Leo and been able to learn it as their first language. There's also people who've been writing programs in various languages for 40 years who deploy and write and deploy programs in our testnet. It's a really good mix. I think the one nice thing about having a new language is, you can attract people from outside of just Web3, right? So I think it's, obviously I think it's cool when people who know Solidity want to try Leo, but I also think it's cool when people from outside of Web3 are like, oh, hey, cool, I can write some kind of privacy preserving program in this new paradigm. I've never, they maybe don't care about the crypto part, but they care about the ZK part, and they can then come and bring their perspective and knowledge to the space.
And there is another technology for privacy, fully homomorphic encryption. So what's your opinion on it, and how will you compare it to your technology?
Yeah, I think so. Fully homomorphic encryption is another, I guess you could call it another form of privacy preserving computation. I think it complements ZK, right? I think so. I think at the end of the day, I think if we have a fully privacy preserving computing stack, it incorporates elements of multi-party computation, fully homomorphic encryption, and ZK, and probably some form of secure hardware. So all of these things I think will work in concert in some kind of higher order protocol. That said, I think today, and maybe actually let's back up for a second. Let's define fully homomorphic encryption in case people in your audience haven't heard it. Fully homomorphic encryption is being able to compute a function over encrypted data, right? So that's it's a little different than what I said about ZK, which is I can prove a fact without revealing why it's true. More or less, you can think of ZK as like you can ask me a yes or no question, and I'll say yes or no. Whereas fully homomorphic encryption is you can ask me any question, and I'll give you the answer. Fully homomorphic encryption, based on known techniques today, is much less practical and much more expensive than zero knowledge cryptography, which has come a huge. It's come a very long way in the last 30 years. But again, I think at the end of the day, if we fast forward 20 years from now, these techniques will be interleaved together, either in the Aleo protocol, or Aleo will become sort of part of some bigger protocol where there's some fully homomorphic encryption piece. That's how I think it'll work at the end of the day.
And do you think there might be a place for the implementation of AI for computation?
Yeah, totally. Again, and AI I think is a different, so that's a use case basically, and I think it's a use case that zero knowledge is relevant for. Like for example, I think this is maybe a bit tangential, but I think a very important use case is being able to prove your identity, whether you're an AI agent or a person, and being able to do that in zero knowledge so that there's some level of consumer protection, I think is really key. So I think something like Aleo is, I think, a perfect platform for building identity applications to be able to prove your humanity. Kind of, WorldCoin talks about this a little bit, and they use zero knowledge cryptography, in fact, in this way. I think the other way it can apply to AI is you can prove either facts about how a model was trained without revealing the data that it was trained on, or you can prove that a specific inference came from a specific model. And I think these are all use cases that I think will become more and more relevant the more and more AI and ML gets incorporated into our day-to-day lives.
And you're currently in testnet, so can you share some of the projects which have been built on Aleo?
Yeah, sure. So we're currently in our third testnet, third and final, so we're preparing to launch our mainnet later this year. And yeah, we've had at this point over 200 projects that have been deployed on Aleo. We just had, in the most recent crop, 113 projects that were deployed as part of our testnet incentives program. And these projects range from, I'll give an example. So there's a company called Demox that has built a wallet on Leo. They also have a NFT project. It's called Privacy Pride that they've launched as an NFT project on Aleo. There's a decentralized exchange called Privix. There's one of our grantees was actually a company called Spruce ID, which has gone on and done a lot of stuff with signing on with Ethereum. But they've kind of built some of the fundamental building blocks of an identity protocol or like a signature protocol on Aleo. And that's kind of what we've mostly seen so far is decentralized exchanges, kind of DeFi stuff. Games, that's another big one. There's a game called Zenit, which is based on this ancient Egyptian game that I actually didn't know about until someone deployed it. So it's games, it's DeFi, it's identity applications, DAO tooling stuff. All those kind of things in the in the last in all these applications that have been deployed. And I guess the last thing I'll say about Aleo that I think is cool, and maybe this is an important point, is that it's permissionless. So if you want to deploy an app on our testnet, you don't have to ask me for permission. You don't have to ask a server for permission. Like you just do it, right? In fact, people have deployed. Like one example was a password manager. Someone created a password manager and deployed it on Aleo, and I have no idea who the person is. I've never, by the way, this is all privacy preserving, so I don't get to see who the whose address this is. So someone deployed these things, and it's really cool to see this ecosystem kind of emerge really organically. But we're hoping to have many times more programs deployed by mainnet, which again we're aiming for later this year. I'm really excited to see what people come out and build.
And can you share some other upcoming plans for Aleo?
Yeah, our big plan is we want to encourage adoption of this technology of zero knowledge cryptography generally, right? So I think one thing we are particularly interested in is developing our own SDK for identity applications for specific use cases. I think Aleo really holds a lot of, I think potentially could reshape how we think about authentication and authorization or cybersecurity on the web, right? If you think about today, logging onto a website, say, right, like the way it works is you have a password, there's an account that's kept on a database somewhere, and so the server's maintaining this database, your password, you enter it, there's a whole process that's supposed to, happen to ensure that that's secure, but many times it's not secure, right? There's like every single day, another big company is getting hacked, another database is breached, another crypto project loses all its funds, right? And that's because there's an inherent asymmetry between the cost to attack these honeypots, which is zero, and the cost to defend them, which is high, right? And so this is why this whole model is fundamentally broken. Whereas if you think about a different model that's based on secrets that only you know and you can just prove facts about, there's no need for a server to store information about you. You can have passwordless logins. You can have, being able to prove that you're a US or Ukrainian or Turkish or South African citizen without scanning your passport to then, have that data be on a server somewhere to be stolen. So it enables actually a whole new paradigm for cybersecurity, and that is like the first application. I mean, there are many other applications of ZK, but that's the first one that we're really wanting to focus on. We really want to show people what it can look like to inspire them to be able to build more and similar things, because we think it can really fundamentally reshape not just Web3, but Web2 as well.
Yeah, that's a great mission. And will you have your own token in Aleo?
Yes, yep. So it's a layer 1 blockchain. So there's a base layer token on the network. The token is used for, like many other networks, it's a, we call it a credit actually. And the credit is for, you're basically paying for the compute, for the proving cost. So each program to execute a given program is has a certain amount of costs associated with it. You can either pay that cost yourself in the form of computing the proof client side, or you can pay a prover to generate that proof for you, and that's what the credits are supposed to represent effectively. Credits are also used to secure the network, since we use proof of stake as the primary consensus protocol. We also have a mechanism that's proof of work like, where provers can, almost like mining, can submit zero knowledge proofs to the network and then receive credits in return that then they can stake and participate in the consensus. So that's really what it's for. It's to access the compute resources of the network and to secure the network and incentivize all actors to act, in the best interest of the protocol.
And how do you see generally current state of the market, and when, in your opinion, will we see the next bull market, and whether you invest into any altcoins and can share with us?
Yeah, look, I think crypto, if you don't have a long view, it can be a roller coaster, right? Because I think inevitably, things go up and they go down. There's always a ton of speculation, oftentimes before it's really warranted, around the price of many of these protocols. So I think my broad comment on the market in general is that, it's continuing to do what it has done for the last 10 years, which is, meteoric rise followed by resounding crash, followed by slow progress of the underlying technology, which then generates optimism, which then leads to the next rise. I think it's hard to say when if I could time that cycle, I would be retired already. But I do think I'm optimistic because each one of these cycles that passes, the underlying technology gets better, and the people that come to the space and are passionate to work on new and interesting product ideas and applications and protocols, multiply. And I think fundamentally it's what gives the space tailwinds, and also the fact that just like a permissionless network at blockchain is something that's just impossible to replicate in a different way, right? Gives you this capability that you didn't otherwise have. And so I think there's definitely, in my mind, long-term value in the space. That's why I've been in the space for as long as I have, and I'm going to continue to be in it, and very proud and excited to work on what we're building, which is of course inspired by many, many other great projects that have come before it. Zcash, Ethereum, you name it, even other projects that use ZK currently. I think Mina Protocol's one. I was just on a panel with Awa from Anoma and Amada, and I think there's a lot to be excited about in the future.
And can you share some investment picks? Was he invest into any altcoins?
Oh man, well I'll go back from when I was an investor. I'll tell you, maybe I'll answer the question at A16Z. Other than Aleo, what was I really excited about? What did I personally work on and investing in? So one project that I was really, really bullish on and really excited about that wasn't in ZK or Aleo was Arweave. I don't know if you're familiar with Arweave, but yeah, Arweave is a decentralized file storage project. It's like PermaWeb, this decentralized permissionless archive, basically. I think it's such a cool project. I was really, really passionate about it really early, and I think it has a ton of potential. That's one I think is really cool. Yeah, I think that's probably the main ecosystem that I focus on and still am pretty excited about. I mean, since I've started at Aleo, again, like I said, it's all your chips on the table. So Aleo for me is it's probably my big bet, I guess, in terms of my time and and how that'll shape up. But honestly, I think I really want to start seeing more focus on products and services that real people use.
That's true. That's what's needed.
Like that's what we really need. I mean, it's great to have people excited about a price of a of an asset, and it could go up or go down. But I think fundamentally, the space is only going to have durable value when real people find utility in it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story and your expertise with us.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on the show.